Hello, hello, hello. We have been having a couple of technical hitches trying to get JP Delaney on. Um, we've just discovered that it's not possible to do this when you're trying to do Instagram from a laptop. So we've now figured that out, and here is. I'm just going to click the right buttons. He can now request to join because he's on his iPad. So. In a moment, we will be joined by JP Delaney, who is an amazing psychological suspense writer. And here he is. We did it.
Sorry about that,
How
everyone.
exciting. We made it.
I'm new to Instagram, and I'm so old-fashioned that I tried to join on a laptop instead of a mobile device, and Instagram didn't like that.
Well, it is, the whole thing is completely baffling, but we're here. We've made it. So what I'm going to do, I'll just tell people a bit about what we're doing. Hi, Joe. And then you and I will talk about, you can tell people your top tips on how to write. Hi from Indonesia. It's lovely seeing all these people. I'm really sorry if there are lots of people now logging on who were trying to get in a moment ago. Sorry about all of that, but we're here and we're going ahead. I'm Lucy Atkins. I'm a novelist, and I'm also a teacher of creative writing at Oxford University on the master's degree there. And I've done a series of classes for psychologies during lockdown. I did weekly creative writing classes, and they're all still available to watch on the IGTV and also on my website, which is lucyatkins.com. And what I'm doing now is a little bit different. We're going to do monthly writing classes where I'm going to get another author to come on and talk, because as I was saying before, the thing about writing is I can tell you how I write, but how I write won't be how you need to write. So really it's about finding your own way of writing. And I think hearing lots of different writers talk about how they do it can really give you inspiration and reassurance. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to JP Delaney is that he's a brilliant and a brilliantly successful writer of psychological suspense, and he also has a really different approach to writing from me, possibly why he's really, really successul. So we're going to talk about that. So just to give you a quick introduction, he's the author of 4 psychological suspense books: The Girl Before, The Perfect Wife, Believe Me, and most recently he's written Playing Nice, which came out, is it August it came out?
Yes, yeah.
So The Girl Before was the big, huge debut, which was published in over 40 countries. It sold over 1 million copies, and it was a New York Times and Sunday Times bestseller. And JP's now, he's now adapting it for the BBC. So he really does know what he's doing when it comes to writing a great, gripping, compelling, rollicking novel.
This introduction is picking me up way too much, Lucy.
How to do it. So should we just dive in then? And I mean, what I think we should really focus on is how to plan your novel, because the world is kind of divided roughly into what's called plotters and pantsers. So plotters are the people that map it all out in advance, and I think JP is a little bit along those lines. And pantsers are the ones who fly by the seat of their pants and don't really know what they're doing, and I fall into that category when I'm starting a novel. So shall I sort of go over to you, JP, and you can talk us through, how do you begin when you sit down to start a novel? Do you know already, before you even start typing your first outline or whatever, do you know what you want to write? Where does it all start?
Well, it starts for me with lots and lots of pages of notes. So I have a sort of list of ideas, which I go back to in between books, and some of them never coalesce into stories. You know, some of them are just things like, families-in-law, families-in-law, fascinating because you can't get away from them. That's a kind of, but that in itself is not exciting enough to make you think I must write that story. So often it's just something happens. It's sort of nuclear fission, 2 or 3 ideas just come together somehow, and that creates the premise. So, you know, with The Girl Before, it was very much loving books about houses, the Gothic tradition, but wanting to, wouldn't it be interesting if you upended that and put it somewhere in a really modern house where it wasn't creaking and haunted, it was just really slick. And oh, minimalism, that's interesting, because minimalism is very psychological. It's about, you know, the architect's obsessions as well as just aesthetics. So, and then I think something happens which is akin to, do you remember when you were a kid and you dipped a little thread of cotton into a copper sulfate solution and they grew those incredible sort of crystals overnight? I think it's a bit like that. You have to have the thread. You have to have something for the things to coalesce around. But basically, I find myself typing, you know, just what I think will be a 1-sentence idea in my list of ideas. And then suddenly I'm going, and it could be this, and it could be this, and it could be this, and it could be this. And when it gets to about 3 pages, I think, you know, there might be a book in this. Perhaps I'd better start putting these thoughts in order and then maybe trying to turn it into a story. And so for me, the idea comes first, then the sort of premise of the story, the setting, or the kind of high concept. And then I think the reason I'm a planner is that I'm terrified of starting a book and discovering that I've run out of steam. So I want to have enough material to get me through the first kind of 30 pages, so I'm committed at least. And that means you're into more than a premise. You have to know what Act 2 is. And I say Act 2, I mean, one of the tips I would give is that, and this isn't for everyone, but it worked for me, is that quite a long time ago, I started to become interested in screenwriting, doing a bit of screenwriting as well as writing books. And I got a couple of books on screenwriting, and I mean, there's millions, but one of the very first was just called Writing the Screenplay by Sid Field, written in the 60s. So very short book, very old-fashioned in lots of ways now, but he basically broke down, because movies are so short, they're about 100 pages long, and most of that's white space, that movie writers have to be able to break a story down into its constituent elements and strip out everything that isn't essential. So they're quite good at saying, okay, what do you need in a story? And actually, E.M. Forster put it really well and more pithily when he said you need a beginning, a muddle, and an end. And I think it's getting from the beginning to the muddle that's the crucial bit. What is the muddle? And movie writers always talk about a 3-act structure. And they will say, okay, you've got an inciting incident. Someone is in their ordinary life, and then something happens to flip them out of that ordinary life and give them a challenge that's got to be fulfilled. At some point, they'll become totally committed to fulfilling that challenge. Why is that? You know, what are the personal stakes? What's getting in the way of fulfilling that challenge? Both externally, i.e. the antagonist, the person who's trying to stop you, but also internally, what's the inner flaw in the character which maybe stops them from thinking that they can overcome this challenge? So just things like that, just the bare bones of a story. I find useful tools. I mean, I don't always use them, and you know, I certainly don't believe in following them slavishly.
You've got that in your head, have you? When you're starting to do this outline, you're thinking 3 acts.
I'll start to think what could be the 3 acts, yeah. So and I don't mean 3 acts in the sense of they'll be equal length. I mean what's the challenge or the mystery, and how is the protagonist going to, you know, how are they going to react to it?
Yeah.
I also have, and I guess this is probably tip number 2, and this is particularly true of our genre, I think.
So wait a minute, is tip number 1 to understand how screen...
Well, is maybe just take a look at story writing structure as it's broken down by movie writers.
Yeah.
But the other thing I find, you know, every book that's sold has a little blurb on the back that has the premise and the hook that's going to get you into the story. You know, so Sarah came home one day. Sarah had the perfect life. But then she discovered that her husband had been nurturing a terrible secret. And you go, okay, that's the kind of, and that's actually the premise of most psychological thrillers. And then there's some kind of hint of what that secret is. So I have a sort of rule that if what's on the back of the book, which the reader already knows, is going to take you up to about page 20 or 30 of the book, I've probably put that book down, because it's telling me stuff that effectively I already know before I get to the bit that the blurb writer thinks is gonna hook me. So I would tend in a thriller, and this isn't true of all genres, I would tend in a thriller to try to get the blurb stuff out of the way in the first kind of 10-15 pages, because if nothing else, you've then kind of you've showed the reader that you're making a pact with them. You're not going to hang about. This is going to be a pacey story, and they're on a kind of journey, and they should buckle up.
Right.
But again, that's not true for everyone or every book.
No. Okay. So kind of having an idea before you start of what a story structure should be, and then making sure that you get the reader into that story really fast. Would that be
I think
a couple of tips? It's so interesting because I don't have any, like, I couldn't even tell you now what a 3-act structure is. I can't think in that way. I find that kills my creativity completely. So to reassure anyone who's joining and thinking, oh my God, I just can't do that. That's too difficult. I don't think you have to think like that, do you? It's really interesting how differently writers do approach it.
yes, and I use things like that as sort of crutches when I'm struggling, actually. So with Playing Nice, again, it was all about the idea and the premise. Sorry, I'm so bad at this that you told me to put the book where people could see it, and I keep neglecting to. So
Bring
anyway,
it
but this is Playing Nice, the new book.
Yes.
So the basic the premise here is that two babies, unbeknownst to their parents, get swapped at birth in a NICU, an intensive care unit. And it's discovered by one of the sets of parents 2 years later, who breaks the news to the other set of parents. And I was reading in the paper about some swapped babies, and one lunchtime I was taking a break from just finishing my previous book, and I read it and I instantly thought that's a great story, and I was interested in it, actually, I think partly because I instantly thought, well, like the girl before, it's a story idea which is absolutely rooted in the Gothic Victorian, the sensation novel tradition. It's not original. There's loads of Dickens books about swapped babies, but they tend to be about inheritances and status, the sort of themes of the time. And what interested me straight away was just the thought that this could be about a modern family trying to say, well, what's the modern way to deal with this situation? Can we actually find a civilized way to deal with this? Hence the title, Playing
And
Nice.
did you have the whole of the plot mapped out before you began writing?
So with that book, it was really easy to plot because I knew, and also I was reading about Brexit and Trump, and I knew that at some point, that was sort of a big concern for me at the time. And I wanted to write about decent, ordinary people who were trying to, resolve things in a civilized way.
Right. Yeah.
But I knew that at some point, because it was a thriller, that was gonna fail.
Yeah.
So that was then a question of saying, well, at what point does it break down? So, well, let's say roughly. Again, you see, and this is movie structure, which I guess I've just internalized now. But movie people say, well, you should have a twist at exactly the midpoint, so halfway through Act 2,
right?
Because that's when you're kind of running out of steam a bit.
Yeah. So
I just thought, okay, the bit where they stop playing nice is probably going to be halfway through the book. Yeah. So
that's quite
instantly, everything just fell into.
Yeah, that's quite. I think that is quite to have something to make sure that you give your reader some kind of shock, turning point, some new piece of information in the middle, because I've talked before about the soggy middle being that
exactly
huge problem in any novel, whatever genre. and if you've got something that is surprising in there, I always think around about page 80 something needs to happen.
Well, I think in our genre again, so the midpoint twist isn't the only twist. A movie writer would say each act one should also end with a twist, because the twist is often the point at which you know, you can walk away from this situation. I mean, in my book they can't, but things could go one way or they could go another. But you're right, round about page 80 you want a real sense that the protagonists are committed now. There's no way out other than you know, victory, overcoming the challenge, whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay, so when you start writing, when you actually start writing the kind of prose, the first draft, have you got a kind of map? Do you put a map on your wall of where you're going? How does it actually look to you, this plan?
No, I tend not. I mean, again, movie writers do that. They have a sort of mind map of post-it notes. I tend to do that when I'm rewriting, because that's the, you know, I like to optimistically think my little 3-page plan is going to work, right, and is going to turn into a book.
So it's just a 3-page, like written, you know.
Yeah, usually 3 pages. I mean, it's as short as it needs to be. I'm always delighted if it's more, because I'll probably do a synopsis, then I'll go through just adding little brackets of things that occur to me, like, you know, don't forget the cats, or, you know, more spooky here or something, because it's only for me. I'm not going to show this to anyone else. But then an interesting thing happens. I usually get to about page 80 and I decide I absolutely hate it, and the story isn't working, and then I do one of two things. Actually, I usually do two of two things. While I'm waiting for the sort of blockage to resolve in my mind, I go back and I do a polish. You know, rather than just kind of stare at it, I read it, but I try and read it productively. So I try and, you know, just take out flaccid paragraphs and hone everything. Because when I call it a polish, actually I think the first polish is more of a sandpapering or a chiseling, because you need to take out a lot of stuff. And sometimes then I stop hating it because I've made it, given it more pace or whatever. More often I still hate it, and I then throw away the plan.
Right.
So at that point, I'm hoping to find a new plan. And I would say that I've never written a book where my original plan held through to the end. Actually, possibly with this last one, I think I wrote my plan. It developed, but I pretty much wrote my plan, and then I showed it to my editor, and she said it's really boring at the end, and I realised she was right, and that I needed a completely different and more suspenseful ending. Right.
So that's okay. So your process could not be more different from mine. So people who are watching this and thinking, that sounds really intimidating, because for me that sounds really intimidating, the idea of thinking of a whole book in advance. The way
that's so funny, by the way, just to say, because what you do sounds terrifying to me. Absolutely terrifying.
It is awful. I'm not recommending what I do, because it's painful and awful. But what I think where I start is character. I think I get a kind of sense of something roughly that I'm interested in, but really it's all about character for me. So I can spend months and months rewriting. I just write randomly. I don't even know where I'm beginning. I start to write some scenes, and then I will rewrite and rewrite and rewrite those scenes obsessively and repetitively until I feel like I've got the character. And then somehow the book starts to kind of mushroom. It sort of starts to expand, and before I know it, not before I know it, I mean months of bloody sitting in my shed thinking this is shit, I then realize, oh wait, I've got 70,000 words. That's the first draft. And then I start to think, okay, what's happened? What's happening? It's such a chaotic process for me, because I've tried doing some planning, and I find that the minute I know where I'm supposed to go, I feel like it's boring and I can't do it. So it's really interesting to me. And I know lots of writers are planners, and I wish I was a planner, but it's so not how that works for me at all. So I think it's really useful actually for us to be talking at such different ends of the spectrum. And I think you are writing you are writing books that hang really heavily on, you have to have an expert plot, you have to have amazing pacing, but you also do have to have all of that stuff where we believe characters and sympathize with them. And so it's
yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the premise comes first, but that doesn't mean the characters are not important. And I think
crucial,
this sort of this dichotomy that people say, oh, it's either plot or it's character. I think any writer knows that's a bit unnuanced, because you have to have both, really.
Yeah.
And
I,
sometimes
all of my
characters
redrafting, all of my redrafting is trying to make it work from a trying together to get looking at the pace and things like that. So yeah, I'm definitely with you that plot is crucial. So I'm just plugging my phone.
The other thing I would say, the other thing I would say is that persistency is also so important. I mean, you talk about months of not knowing whether you got a book. The Girl Before, which was the first of my psychological thrillers, was actually an idea I had about 18 years ago. And I knew instantly, once I got to the idea of the minimalist house, I knew instantly that was a really interesting idea. And I thought, I worked out a plan how to write it as a book, and I started writing it. And about halfway through, I realized it was terrible. And it really was terrible. And I actually had a contract to write in a different genre at the time. I was writing more sort of literary fiction. So I didn't really have to. So I spent about 3 or 4 months on it. I wrote 3/4 of a book. I put it on one side. I wrote this other book. I then came back to it because I was in love with the idea. And this continued for about the next 6 books, over 15 years.
Wow.
I tried about once every 18 months to make this idea work.
That's amazing.
And it was only when that series of books actually came to an end, my agent was kind of saying, come on, what are you going to do next? I actually pulled several things out of the bottom drawer, and the third one was this kind of mystery that I'd abandoned several times. And I read it through again, and I thought, well, if I just throw out the first 50,000 words, so pretty much half the book, and start there, then actually that would be much more interesting. And so that's what I did, and that became the beginning of, and it was then, it became a much, and also I'd had time to realize what the book was really about and why I wanted to write it so much, and what the kind of themes were. And sometimes it just takes time like that. And I think, I mean, my view is that when you depend on the premise, the idea, good ideas occur to me so rarely that I can't afford to not write one. I have to keep coming back to it and trying to make it work. So I think persistence is probably the most important quality you can have as an aspiring writer. Yeah.
And so to summarize your kind of top tips, can you give me a kind of on 5?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't planning to talk about them in this order, actually, but so they're slightly out of whack. But I think the first one is, if you are a planner, I think it helps to have a beginning, a muddle, and an end. A premise, what the challenge for the protagonist is, what they've got to achieve, what's stopping them, and then how that gets resolved. So a simple 3-act structure. There are millions of books. If you look up movie 3-act structure, you'll find so much online about it, and you don't want to go down that rabbit hole of getting obsessed with it. But for me, it's a useful tool to develop an idea into a story. And I think that's true of characters too, because it's about, characters want something. That's what makes them interesting, usually. And you have to know what's stopping them from achieving that, both externally, but I think more importantly, internally, because it's the internal which makes books interesting. I think if you get stuck, it's worth just stopping and doing a productive rewrite, a heavy polish, because the answer to what you do next is often in what you've done before.
That's
Um,
the essence of what I do. That is what I do
yeah,
full time for about the first year. I polish,
yeah,
polish, and polish, and then it starts to take off.
exactly. Somehow you find the answer. I mean, it's almost T.S. Eliot, isn't it? You know, in my beginning is my end, and I think that's very true of psychological thrillers, because there's often a kind of circular, you know, a sense of a circle being completed or turning again in our genre. Um, Start where the blurb stops. So don't spend 30,000 words getting the reader up to speed with what they already know from the back of the book.
Yeah.
Jumping quick and keep the pace going.
Yeah.
And often I think that's, you know, that's something that happens in the rewrite, because you need to tell the story to yourself,
Yeah.
and get everything clear and what happened when, and then so often you can jump in at a kind of suspenseful point.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying that with Magpie Lane, your brilliant first sentence was actually something that came about that was halfway through the book originally.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is a kind of micro tip, I guess, but I think the reason I think it's a brilliant first sentence is because it's very unshowy, but it jumps you right in. You get a sense of what happens immediately before and what's going to happen, what could happen immediately afterwards. So, and I can't remember the wording, forgive, but will you remind us what the wording is of Magpie Lane's first sentence? You have to remind yourself.
They're waiting for an answer. What do they want me to say? Perhaps they think I'm the stalker targeting the president of an Oxford college on his early morning jog.
Yeah, that's great. They're waiting for an answer. It's just, it's like, I'm there straight away.
I always like that. I do think that that's something I've learned, is to kind of, is that you want to plunge your reader into a situation that's happening.
Yeah.
You don't want to take them by the hand and slowly lead them towards a situation that's happening, because it can be really effective if you're brilliant, but it can also lose people quite, you know, if you don't get to somewhere they're interested in.
Yes.
Quite fast,
and I think the reason it's important is partly because, you know, that first line, again, it's a promise you're making to your reader. You're saying, this is the kind of book I'm writing. You know, and with our sorts of books in particular, you want people to go, oh, okay, you know, I've got momentum here. Yeah. You know, we're moving.
Yeah.
And whereas I think my heart sinks when I read a very sort of showy first sentence. Everyone always raves about, you know, I was in bed with my catamite when the Archbishop knocked or something, and it's just so show-offy and, you know, that sort of stuff. It's not storytelling, it's showing off. Yeah,
I think that is definitely a danger, and that one thing I would caution. We'll probably do a separate thing all about actual tension, but one thing I think some books fail by being overplotted, by having too many twists and turns, so that you start to feel like you're just being manipulated through something. So I think there should be a note of caution when you know, if you're a planner, look at it with a bit of caution. Don't think I have to be totally clever all the time and they have to always be twist, 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 because that can just become monotonous.
Yes, yes. I think twists are overrated, and in fact, I would say, in my mind, I don't think of them as twists. I think of them as revelations. I think it's about you as a storyteller, revealing something which people didn't know, but which is important, which they need to know, and which is organic to the story.
So we should actually ask if anybody's got questions, because we've sort of got to the end of our chatting time. Does anyone who's been with us and wants to write, have you got any questions that you want to put to me or to JP? Otherwise, we will do a sort of quick summary for you to take away, because I know that there's a lot of people who join these classes who actually really love to just make a nice list of things to think about and have that on their desk as they write. So if there are, well, do ask a question. If you want to ask a question, nothing is too silly to ask. And that's exactly what we're here for. So if there's something that you want to know, ask us now. Otherwise, JP, do you want to just give us like a really brief, here's 5 things that you can try?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of started doing that,
Donna, I've got,
and I now can't remember what number I got up to. But
yeah,
uh, I mean, I think one thing we haven't really crystallized is that I think we're kind of saying the same thing about first
yeah,
drafts. That your first draft is very much the beginning of you might have something down on paper and you feel really good because you finished, obviously, but certainly with a thriller,
mm,
that you're going to have to work on it to make it slick, and that's you know it works at lots of levels. You have to make each sentence slick, and there's a sort of trick that good editors know of, just knowing how to order the words in a sentence so that you end on an action word
mm.
and get propelled into the next sentence, and then
Well, we've
each
got some
paragraph.
questions. Do you want some questions?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So we've got, how do you know when to just give up on an idea altogether? I think that's a brilliant question.
Brilliant
Yeah.
question. And you don't. I mean, I've got my ideas list is, and I put sort of clips in there, so it's bits of research, interesting articles I found. But it's about 80 pages now, and I've been through it. I'm currently looking for a new idea, and I've been through it perhaps 20 times, picking up ideas, spending a few days on them, trying to make them work, then thinking, oh no, it doesn't. Then the next week I come back to it, or I'll come back to a different idea, and you just you just can't tell when an idea is dead. But equally, it's that persistence thing again, that it's so important to have an idea
Mm.
that you don't give up. So
Your idea can be, I think it can be much more vague than people think.
yeah,
The idea that I've got at the moment really is just about two old ladies. I'm just really interested in this relationship between these two old ladies. That's my idea. Obviously, I need to embellish that if you're trying to sell that to someone. But yeah, I think the idea, often it's not that the idea is dead, it's that you haven't found what interests you about your idea. Does that make any sense?
yeah. And I'm a firm believer that you almost need two ideas. You need the original idea, because the original idea usually isn't quite a story. But when and I'm sorry, Lucy, I'm going to use, I mustn't use your example actually, because might poison it for you. So suppose your idea was actually two teenage girls.
Mm.
And you go, well, two teenage girls isn't a story, but two teenage girls, one of whom has anorexia, and the other one hates her, is, that's the beginnings of the story.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. That's the key, is to find the interest within your idea. So to go back to the question, how do you know when to give up? I think it might not be that you need to give up when you're starting to feel bored by it. It might be that you just need to find a different angle, find a different way in. Next question, how long do you take from start to finish?
Gosh. So Playing Nice was really quick. Took me 6 months from start to finish. The editing process was longer than the writing process. But I'd finished a draft I was happy with, just about draft 7, within 6 months. The Girl Before took me 15 years. So, you really can't predict.
Yeah.
The only thing that matters is where you get to, not how long you take to get there.
My books are definitely starting to take me longer and longer to write, but that's probably because they're getting more complex, and I'm investing more, I think. Well, no, I'm not investing more, but I think I'm approaching writing slightly differently. But
I'm just going to jump in there. Sorry, Lucy, I'm just going to jump in because I just saw a question going past which said, do you know when The Girl Before might be televised? But actually, the reason that I'm not writing, one of the reasons I'm not writing a book at the moment is that the BBC have commissioned a pilot script which I'm adapting. So and we should hear any day whether they're going to greenlight it. So
exciting.
That's my current passion is getting The Girl Before onto the screen.
Well, it would be amazing on the screen. Looking at your ideas, I find writing and not thinking tends to get me unstuck. Writing and not thinking. I don't really understand what you mean by that, Adrian. Do you, JP? Looking for the new ideas. Okay, let's
No.
want to, do you run your
Yeah.
ideas past anyone?
I'm sort of superstitious. I sort of feel if I've got an exciting idea, if I tell the story to people, I might sort of wear it out.
Yeah.
So I might just give my agent a one sentence synopsis, and then also sometimes I'll show my synopsis to my agent or people, to my editor, to see what they think, and that can be a bad thing to do, because a couple of times now I've had editors say, "Oh, we're not quite sure about that. We really want something with a likable, feisty female narrator or something, and you haven't delivered that. You're not writing that." And and that sort of puts me off, even though they always say, "But write the book you want to write." It kind of puts me off, and then
Yeah, I
yeah.
think, right.
So I would say don't tell too many people too soon.
Definitely. My top tip for, if you're not a planner, I think, is try and get about 80,000 words down without showing a single person or discussing it with anyone, because that's the quickest way. If you don't know where you're going with a book, the quickest way to kill it is to start to have other people's opinions, and to start to show it to people who will say discouraging things, or you'll start to write thinking, oh, so and so is going to read this, I should make it ...
Yeah.
Yeah. How many main characters?
But sorry, can I add one thing to that, Lucy, which is that when you do show it to people, you'll probably show it to your nearest and dearest or friends first, and they'll all want to be encouraging, and that's great, but it's of limited use. So what I always do is, even now when I've written quite a lot of books, I would say to anyone who reads it, tell me 5 things that you would change. And number 1 is usually something fairly sort of innocuous, because they don't really want to hurt your feelings. But by the time they're running out of things to say, they say the thing that really matters, which is, but the end is so bloody boring, and then
interesting.
You go, okay, they're right. I kind of knew they were right.
Yeah.
In my heart of hearts, I'll change the ending.
Yeah. And okay, we'll do a final question because we really need to stop. But how many main characters before a story gets too busy? Says Stephanie.
Oh, gosh, depends on your talent, I think. I tend to keep my books small. I think psychological thrillers often are quite intimate, small. On the other hand, there's nothing better than reading a book with a big, exciting cast of characters, if people can handle it.
I think though that if you think about something like Middlemarch or something, you've still got the core characters, haven't you? I think you can't expect people to invest, unless you're going to go into a certain amount of depth with a character. You can't expect people to invest too much. Or unless you're someone like George Saunders writing a kind of unbelievable experimental multi-voiced novel, I would say maybe 4-ish is probably the max, isn't it? If you really want people to care.
Yeah, and I think an editor said to me when I published my first book, she said, every book at its heart is about one relationship. And I think that's very true, that there is the relationship between 2 people, which is at the heart of every story, because that's what, as human beings, drives us. We are all looking to connect with another person, and we do that one person at a time.
Yeah. Well, that's a lovely place to stop, because I think actually that condenses the idea. If you're a planner, think about that, but also if you're not a planner, also think about that actually that's what you can start to explore, is relationships. If you're a planner, you can plot it out, and if you're a pantser, you can kind of unravel it from within, and that's really what I do. And I think what you do is a more intellectual way in, but fundamentally, once you've got that first draft, what you're then looking to do is make it all hang together and feel authentic, isn't it? Is that sort of, and that's always going to be about human relationships, really. So we should stop, but I just want to thank you for coming on. We made it. We got on. We got at the end. Yes.
Finally, apologies again.
No, you were. I'm certainly no one to criticize someone else for not being able to use technology.
Well, not using Instagram, I know is a terrible thing in this day and age.
Well, maybe we've lured you on here now. You can keep on. So thank you. And anyone who is just coming on now and has missed it, I'm going to try and save it, and it should be up on Psychology's IGTV and eventually on my website, which is lucyatkins.com. And thank you so much to JP Delaney, whose new book, Playing Nice, is out now and is absolutely brilliant. A masterclass in plotting. So if you really want to know what he's been talking about, read that book. But yeah, we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much.
Brilliant.
See you.
Great fun. So thank you so much.
Bye.